Today is May 5th, 2011, and I'm in the home of Thelma Miller. Mrs. Miller, do I have your permission to talk to you today?
Well, I'm very happy to have you here and share whatever I have with you.
Tell me when and where you were born.
Well, I was born in a farm home in Story County, where my father had lived. It's now a century farm. It was had been his father's place, and it was in the middle of the winter, and the doctor came in horse and buggy, and that was my beginning.
Was your date January 11th, 1917?
Right?
Wow. You then lived, you grew up in Marshalltown.
Mm-hmm.
And
My mother died when I was just 2, and my father could not take care. I had a brother that was 3 years older than I, and my father just decided that he wasn't going to have us separated, and he was going to take care of us, so he left the farm and moved to Marshalltown to care for his children.
it sounds like you had a good family life.
Yeah, it was, as I said, mother died, and so I just had the one brother, and he died when he was 21, so I didn't have much family left.
How did you get to Ames, Iowa?
Well, I stayed in Marshalltown. I grew up there. I went to high school and even went to the business college, which was then in Marshalltown. And my husband came from his home down south of Marshalltown to the business school, and we got acquainted, and he had come to Ames and had a job, so we were married, and I moved to Ames.
Approximately when did you move to Ames?
In 1941.
Oh, and I believe you got married in 1941.
We came to Ames immediately. The day after we were married, we came to Ames.
No honeymoon.
No honeymoon.
Now, I know that there is a tradition called a chivalry, and some people who are listening to our conversation might not know what a chivalry is. But I think when you got married, somebody gave you a chivalry.
They certainly did. A group of friends, which included lots of people that Marvin had gotten acquainted with. He had worked here a few years before we were married, and Farwell Brown, who was well known in Ames, he was one of the ones at the chivalry. It's just a group of friends that came into the home unexpected. We didn't know they were coming at all. And they, in fact, they took us on a ride. See, this was the middle of winter, and Farwell had gone out into the country, and I don't know whether it was his father or somebody had a horse-drawn sleigh, but they brought that sleigh into town, and of course pulled it with a car. They didn't have the horse, but they took us down Main Street in that sleigh in the middle of the winter. But they just they, instead of throwing rice at a wedding, which you've heard of, they brought rice and they threw it all over the house. I found rice in my drawers and closets and for years afterwards. But it was just fun. It was all in fun.
Of course. Was that a group you later, you continued the friendship?
It was a group, they called themselves Ashes Tonga. And I can't remember who all was in it. I know the Browns were there, and there was a Reva Rhodes who used to live in Ames, and she was there, and I just don't remember who the rest of them were. But it was a group of young people that had gotten together, and it was just like a little club, a little group. Noel and Margaret Taylor, who Noel had worked in the store in Ames Stationers, and they were in the group, and they're still living. Not too many of that group left anymore.
Yes. So did you meet once a week, or did you have supper together, or you play cards together?
Oh, they met. I don't know that they met on a regular basis, but they quite often met at the Congregational Church for some reason. They had a big meeting room, and they'd meet there. And I don't really remember what Tonga was meant many friends, or it had some meaning. But it was just a little social group.
So your husband, Mr. Marvin Miller, was working at Ames Stationers. I think, was it called that then, or was it called the Ames?
And when he first came to work there, it was Ames Newsstand.
That's right.
And they even distributed papers. He never could go to church on Sunday because they had to go down and separate the papers. The kids would come there and get the papers. Well, then it changed to, it was known as Reynolds on Iverson for a long time. And it was during the time that Marvin worked there that they changed the name again to Ames Stationers. And,
did you ever have any involvement with the store?
only when Marvin was gone in the service, I stayed home. But I worked at the store then. I went down and worked. He always laughed. I just worked half days, and he always laughed and said, well, I did in a half a day what he did all day long. But of course I didn't do that much. But anyway, that was my only. And when of course he was gone for, well, he was in the service for 4 years. I only worked a couple of years, I guess. But
And what was the store inventory like when you were helping out when Marv was in the service? What was the store inventory like? What did you sell?
oh, it was lots of office equipment and supplies, and they had office typewriters and adding machines and that kind of thing, and of course supplies. And they had a book department. They sold books. In fact, well, in the early times Marvin was there, and earlier yet, they used to have a lending library in Ames Stationers. And for a long time, I don't know whether they still have it or not, I had a book. They had a stamp in the front of the book that they'd lend out the books. And so then they just had the book department, and they had a photographic department, and they had typewriter repair, and
Some people might say, what's a typewriter now?
yeah, that's for sure.
So when you and Mr. Miller first came to Ames, where was your first house in Ames?
1217 Kellogg.
Tell me about that house.
Well, it's a little house. Ray Van Meter was also a member worked in the store, and he and Daisy found this house for us to rent. We paid $35 a month, if you can imagine, rent for that house, and it was just a little, a nice little house. It's still there, but we lived there just a year, and the man who owned it, his daughter wanted to move in it. So we had to move out, of course, and at that time we moved over on Ridgewood, and we lived over there a year, I guess. And we lived on, then when Marvin was going to go into the service, I knew I was going to stay home, and the house that we were renting at that time was up for sale, and I said, oh, about the time he left and be gone, I'd have to move, it'd be sold, and I'd have to be gone. We didn't want to buy that house. So we bought a little house over on Grand Avenue and lived there for 18 years then.
So the house on Grand Avenue, do you remember the address?
1122. And it was nice little house, and we loved it, but it was on Grand Avenue, one-car garage, you backed out onto Grand Avenue, and it was just impossible.
So that must be where your children grew up.
They were, well, Don was in high school and Janet was just starting to college when we moved out here, which was in 1961.
You told me earlier that Ashmore Drive, which is your current street of residence, it was practically like living in the country then.
It was gravel, wasn't paved. In fact, our driveway wasn't even paved when we bought the house and moved here. But it was really out in the country.
And did you have mail service to your door, or did you have to?
We had to go to the corner for it, but
I also, please go ahead.
there weren't. A lot of the houses have been built since we lived. There wasn't a house on the corner. There wasn't the one across the street. Wasn't there, and several of them west of here weren't built when we came.
As long as we're talking about houses, I understand that very close to this address, 2011 Ashmore, is an exact replica of this house. How did that come to be?
Well, Howard Shorey built the house. Built this house,
yes.
And they, it was 4 years old when we moved here, and so they went to Colorado where their son was. They wanted to go out and be where he is. They went out and were there for 6 weeks or so and didn't like it and came back and wanted to buy the house back. Well, we were well established here by then, and we didn't want to sell it back. So they went down the street a block and built a house, and it's almost exactly like this. The painters would come up and they'd see what color paint was on the walls, and they wanted the same height of the cabinet in the kitchen, in the bathroom. They wanted the countertop just the same height. They wanted the door handles on all the cupboards to be the same, and it was funny to have these painters coming up and matching colors. But it was built with a walkout basement like this has, and there really is like a little apartment downstairs. There's a bath and a kitchen and a bedroom down there, along with a fireplace in the living room, and their house was very similar to this one.
You and your husband have been very active in Ames.
Yes, Marvin was active in the community.
Well, then by extension, you would have been active too.
Well, just following along. I didn't participate in a lot of activities like he did, but he was president of the Chamber of Commerce, and he was president of Rotary Club, and we were fairly active in the church.
So, I do know that Mr. Miller was very active in the Rotary Club, but there's an organization for women.
The Rotary Anns.
Right. Were you a Rotary Ann?
Oh yes, every woman that is married and we didn't have a lot of activities, but we enjoyed. We went to a lot of their Rotary conventions, and I think one time I counted up, we went to about 13 of the international conventions. So that took us quite a ways.
Were you ever active as an officer with Rotary, or helped Marvin with Rotary at all?
Oh, yes, I was. Marvin was secretary of the Rotary Club to begin with, and he had that job for I don't know how many years. It was an elective job. Well, part of the secretary's job is to keep attendance. They always signed their name when they were there, and so they had an attendance record that they kept. And at that time, the secretary and was also the treasurer of Rotary. So Marvin did that for a long time, and so I helped him to keep the record attendance and all that kind of stuff. And so when a new man was elected for secretary, which was Homer McNeil, who worked in the bank, and he said, well, yeah, he'd be secretary of Rotary if I'd help him. He knew that I had, kept the books and stuff, and so I said, well, yeah, I'd help him. Well, then it turned out that I just was an official assistant secretary for Rotary, and I did this for about 20 years, I think. And so I got to, and that was before women were in Rotary. They didn't accept them as members, but
So you were there every
Yeah.
Monday?
No, I didn't go.
Oh, you didn't go, you just...
He just bring all this stuff home, and I do it at home. So but it was fun. In fact, when I retired, I just said it got to be a paying job. They finally got so they paid me a little bit to help with their secretarial work. But then when I quit, they made me a Paul Harris Fellow, which I was one of the very first women that held that, and it was just an honorary, But,
What happened was someone needed to donate money, so,
Yeah.
which that's even more significant.
Yeah.
Someone donated money in your name,
Yeah,
which
that's
is very
right.
nice.
It's $1,000 to become a Paul Harris Fellow. So the club did that and gave me a membership, which I was honored.
Well, for a job well done. I'm sure you've made many friends in Ames.
Oh, yes.
What a wonderful time.
Marvin was, working with the public. I said he knew everybody in Ames, and we had lots of friends.
Go ahead.
Lots of them are gone now.
I think when a person is active in a business community, as Mr. Miller was active, you know other people who are active in the business community. And one couple comes to mind, Mr. Clifford and Mrs. Catherine Hawk. They were your
Yes,
friends?
yeah. In fact, they were friends of ours. When we lived down on Grand Avenue, Cliff was still in college. And they lived in a little apartment across the street from us. And we also knew them through church. They belonged to the same church that we did. So we knew Cliff and Kitty from way back when. And then at one time, they lived next door to us. They lived just right west of us here. And I think they lived there when they moved out to Colorado, when the company moved out. But Cliff and Kitty were good friends.
And we should probably say what their business was.
Well, they built the Hawk Chemical Company here, and of course sold that when they after they'd been out there for several years. But Kitty was also a pilot. She had her own plane, and of course with the company, she had the company plane and flew for them. But she had her own plane, and it was funny because Kitty Hawk was pretty known for her first flight, and here was Kitty Hawk that again was a pilot.
Because Kitty Hawk in North Carolina was HAWK, and Kitty Hawk in Ames is HACH. Yeah. Did you ever fly with her?
No, I never did. But I kept in touch with Kitty. It's just been the last few months that I haven't really heard directly from Kitty. But they were wonderful people. They were fun and wonderful.
You probably had good friends with Ames stationers too. And your church, you mentioned church. Mr. Delmar and Mabel Woodward.
Oh my, they're wonderful friends.
Yes.
They still are. They come out to see me every Monday. That's just a ritual at you. But Del and Mabel and Marvin and I traveled together a lot. We had a trip to Australia together, and we were with each other when we went to China, and we've just been real good friends.
What
Many
was
years.
what was your first international trip? Oh, I'm probably putting you on the spot.
Oh,
I'll let
the
you think
first
about
one.
that.
I don't know. It probably was. It probably was a Rotary trip. Probably maybe.
I'm sorry.
Well,
I put
other than to Canada, I think probably the first international one was when we went to South America.
Mhm.
We went to Brazil to a Rotary.
And think about that. A little girl born on a century farm.
Yes, Marvin always marveled at that. He said that he just couldn't imagine when he was a youngster growing up on a farm, and his father didn't like to, he didn't even get out in society much, let alone travel. And I think Marvin said he was out of high school before he was ever out of the state. And then to think that we went on such marvelous trips, and we just had wonderful associations with people and on trips.
And what general decade did you start to do all your traveling? Was it the 1960s about?
Well, the late 1960s. See, we moved here in 61, and it probably was when Janet was out of high school and had gone into college, that we took any trips of before the children were out of high school. We had been in every state in the United States. We wanted them to appreciate the country, and so we really saw the United States before we went any outside. But then when and it was Rotary that took us to our first big trips. We went to South America with them, and we went to Australia on a Rotary trip. And
did you stay with families sometimes, or did you sometimes stay in hotels? Mostly in hotels.
It was always hotels. And,
Okay.
this friendship travel, they'd stay in homes, but we didn't do that when we went.
On a different note, your last name, Miller, is a fairly common name.
Oh, very common.
But your first name is not that common. But there are sometimes instances when Thelma Miller got mixed up with another Thelma Miller.
Yes, once in a while we did get mixed up. But Marvin, of course, the Miller name is very common, and there was another Marvin Miller in town for a while, but he was a young man, and that led to some kind of funny things too, because when Marvin was gone in the service, and of course Marvin was stationed here with the Navy unit here for quite a while before he left. So when about the time he left, then I had my second little boy, or my second child, which was a little boy, and so by that time I was working in the store, and Marvin was gone, and there was a lady came into the store. I had Donnie while I was working there in the store, and a lady came in, and she was so embarrassed, and she had a son whose name was Marvin Miller, and he had gotten some advertising of baby products that were evidently meant for me, but she said her son was so embarrassed over that.
Well, someone had said that there was a day when Marvin had returned home and that you, Thelma, were not there. So he had picked up the newspaper and saw that there was a Thelma Miller that had been admitted to the hospital, and it really startled him. What happened after that?
Well, as you said, he called the hospital and said that was Thelma Miller a patient, and they said yes, and he says, well, what's she in for? And the nurse kind of stammered a while and said, well, we don't give out information like that. Well, he says, I'm his wife, or she's my wife. Oh, she said, well, she said she had a baby this morning.
That is a good story.
Marvin said, well, that wasn't her, it wasn't his wife then, but that was funny.
Yeah. When you traveled, did you have fun talking about Iowa and talking about Ames?
Oh yes, we always took something with us to give out, as little mementos, and whether it was just a little label of some kind or a little memento. At one time, I knit pot holders that looked like an ear of corn. And they were so easy to carry, and it was fun to give out, and we had lots of fun with our travels.
Yes. Well, talking about knitting, how did you learn how to knit? Did you just?
Oh my! I think I took some classes. This was way back before I was even married. I think there were classes in Marshalltown that I took,
And so, did you knit throughout life?
yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much.
I still am knitting. I enjoyed it. It was a nice. You could pick it up and carry it. And,
Did you take your knitting traveling?
Not too much, because we never had time for that, to sit down and do that. And I didn't like to do it on a plane or car. I like to look and see where we were going.
Sometimes it's maybe a good thing to do just when you're watching TV
That's right.
or listening to the radio. That's another good thing. Was there any particular yarn or color or something that you always liked, but you just like to do? You must be, your hands must feel good then.
Oh yeah, I could knit and watch television, and I enjoyed knitting.
Yeah. Back to traveling for just a moment. When you did travel, were you gone away for as much as a week or 2 weeks?
Oh yes, yeah, we'd be gone. To these Rotary conventions, we'd be gone as much as 3 weeks. Marvin had worked in the store for several years, and I think, I'm not sure what trip it was, our first trip that we took, that Mr. Iverson went on the trip. He was the owner of the complete owner of the store when Marvin was first working there. And he had never taken trips because he never had anybody working for him that he felt he could leave in charge, So when Marvin was there, Mr. Iverson took a long trip and was gone, and so then that inspired Marvin. He got a couple weeks vacation at a time, and so we took some time off and traveled.
He was a good mentor.
Yeah, that's right.
When you traveled, did you take lots of suitcases if you were gone for 3 weeks?
Well, I don't remember particularly, but we never had any trouble. I always feared that we'd lose you. You hear people lose their luggage, and we never had any trouble with that. Never.
When you were traveling internationally, people really dressed up for travel then.
Oh yes, yeah. We didn't. You didn't have slacks and comfortable things you could travel in, and it took a lot of clothes to travel.
Ladies wore dresses and
pretty much.
yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to tell me about traveling? There's some other questions I want to ask, but anything, because I know that was an important part of your life.
I can't really think of any particular highlight.
Marvin Miller started, I think it was in 1939, with the Iverson group. And then, of course, you came with him in 1941 to Ames. And along the way, he wasn't just a staff member, he became a partner and an owner. What was your participation in helping him make some of those decisions?
Well, not too much. He was, he knew what he wanted, and Mr. Iverson, who then was the sole owner, see, it used to be Reynolds and Iverson, and then Mr. Iverson became the sole owner, and then he was kind enough to Marvin that instead of Marvin having to buy into the store, Mr. Iverson gave him ownership as part of his pay. And so he just went up the ladder that way, and he was, Mr. Iverson was wonderful. They were such a lovely couple, and I think now of when people are helping me about that for a long time. Well, Mr. Iverson, they moved up to Northcrest, I don't know how many years ago that was, but then Mr. Iverson died, and Mrs. Iverson became unable to get around. She was such a lovely lady. She knew what she liked, and she knew what she wanted, and she never. Well, she used to go to Chicago to do her shopping, and she got so she couldn't go to Chicago, so I would take her to Des Moines. She'd always go to Des Moines to shop. And we even went down there after they'd moved up to Northcrest. We went to Des Moines one day to pick out wallpaper. She wanted her little pantry papered instead of painted. And so we went to Des Moines and picked out some wallpaper. And the decorator that was there then let her know a few days or weeks later that wallpaper was out of stock, and so we had to go back and pick up some more. And I remember she was looking at paper, and this salesman said, well, now this particular piece was removable. And what does she mean removable? Well, he says, if it's self-adhesive, and if you have it someplace you don't like it, well, you can take it off and put it someplace else. She looked at him and she says, Don, she says, I don't think the next place I move is going to use wallpaper. But I would take her to Rochester, to the clinic up there. One year I took her 13 times to Rochester. And I'd take her to Boone we didn't have a podiatrist here in Ames, and so I'd take her to Boone, and so one day she said that, well, she said, I'm just going to give you my car. She said, and then I won't feel so bad about asking you to take places. So what you do, she put 4 new tires on her car and gave her car to me.
Well, you had been very kind to her.
So it was, she was a wonderful person.
Yeah. Those were good times in business when someone who's the owner can have more of a family relationship with someone.
We had a nice group of people that worked in the store. We used to have company parties, and when we first moved out here, the porch out here was just a screen porch, and we were having a company dinner one night, and we were going to be out on the porch, and we were having dinner, and a windstorm came up, wind and rain, and I had to take everything over the porch, and we had food in here, and the people would come and they'd drive into the garage to let the people out and come in, and such a mess it was. But it was a family feeling, you know, a group. That,
Well, the reason I thought you might be involved with Mr. Miller's decision is because you did have a business. I mean, you went to the business college, so you were numbers inclined already.
I am. I had worked as a secretary in Marshalltown for different places. I worked for a lawyer for a while, and I worked for a doctor for a while. Then I worked in the stenographic department of Banks Furnace. That was where I was when I got married. Came.
So along the way, I know you've developed some interests. I understand you're a collector.
Too much of a collector, mostly junk.
Well, you know what they say. One person's this is another person's that. Yeah.
That's right.
Did that partly happen because of your travels? You just got interested in things?
Oh, I don't think so. One of my collections is buttons, if you can believe that. And that I got interested in just through friends. There used to be a button club in Ames, and I joined that. And Anna Olson is still a member. She lives here in Ames yet. But she was really a collector. But
How many buttons do you have?
well, I figured up just not long ago because I didn't know what I was going to do with them, and so I have them in great big notebooks, and I figured that there's something like 4,000 of them.
You're taking my breath away.
So it was.
Are they old buttons?
Yeah, a lot of them are, and I had asked Ann what to do with them, because. But she said that, well, she came and looked at them, and said that the best thing I could do would be to sell them at the button auction. They have an Iowa button auction once a year, and it's held in Marshalltown. The auctioneer lives there, and so they have this button auction, and so she said that would be the best place to sell them. Well, but she said that she would go through them and you know, sort of specify what they were, and I got to thinking I didn't really want to go to all that trouble, so I was talking to Denny Wendell, and he says that the Historical Society would like to have them, so I think that's where they're going to go. I put them all back in the boxes and put them up on the shelf again, and so I think that's where they're going to end up. But
Well, you probably had a lot of experience entertaining because of Mr. Miller's position in the community and in the position of Rotary. There have probably been a lot of dinners you've helped with.
well, yeah, we used to enjoy that, but oh my, been so long ago, and there just aren't many of those people left anymore.
But good memories. Yes. I appreciate so much you taking the time to talk about living and working in Ames, and your stories are really important to.
Well, they're fun to relive, but I don't know that you can put all the fun and into words. Marvin, you know, the last 4 years of his life he was blind, and we had put our name in at Northcrest. When he retired, well, he thought, well, he'd like to move to Northcrest. He was on the board up there. He thought that would be a nice place to live, and so John Anderson was the director at that time, and they had just built those new houses, which were like little cottages, and there were some that had walk-up basements, and Marvin said to John, he said, I'd like to have one of those. Well, he says it'll be 4 years before you can ever get into that. I said, well, that'd be about the time he'd want to retire, and so they put our name down. Well, wouldn't you know, they did call us in about 4 years, and one of those was available. At that time, Marvin had just lost his eyesight. And we said no, he knew his way around the house here, and we weren't going to move. So we didn't go. But it was that close.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with me this morning.
Well,
it's been my pleasure, and I appreciate
It's been fun for all the memories. I'm not sure that it'll be interesting to anybody else, but it's been fun for me.